They threw her clothes in garbage bags on the front lawn while the neighbors watched. They called her a leech. They called her a failure. Brett signed the divorce papers with a smirk, convinced he was finally shedding the dead weight that was holding his family's legacy back. He thought she was just a quiet housewife with nothing to her name but a used sedan. He didn't know that the woman he was kicking to the curb wasn't just a housewife. She was the silent founder of the very conglomerate his failing company was begging to merge with. And by the time he realized his mistake, the ink was already dry. This is the story of how a man divorced his wife without knowing she owned a multi-billion-dollar empire and how she made him pay for it. The sound of expensive porcelain shattering against the hardwood floor echoed through the Caldwell mansion. It was followed by the sharp, piercing laugh of Patricia Caldwell, the matriarch of the family, and a woman who wore her cruelty like a strand of pearls. "Finally!" Patricia shouted, kicking a suitcase toward the open front door. "The leech is detaching itself!" Keisha stood near the foyer, her face an unreadable mask of calm. She wore a simple grey cardigan and jeans, her hands folded quietly in front of her. To anyone looking in, she appeared defeated, a woman being discarded by a wealthy, powerful family. But if you looked closely at her eyes, you wouldn't see tears. You would see the cold, hard calculation of a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. "You don't have to break my things, Patricia," Keisha said, her voice steady. "Your things," Brett sneered, walking down the grand staircase. He adjusted his silk tie, looking at his wife of 3 years with pure disdain. "Nothing in this house is yours, Keisha. You came here with nothing and you're leaving with nothing. Actually, that's not true. You're leaving with the debt of wasting 3 years of my life." Brett was handsome in a conventional way. Tall, sandy-haired with the kind of jawline that suggested money. But his eyes were weak. He was a man who had inherited a construction empire, Caldwell Builds, and was currently running it into the ground, though his ego wouldn't let him admit it. "Just sign the papers, Keisha," Tiffany, Brett's younger sister, chimed in. She was sitting on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, barely looking up. "I have friends coming over in an hour for a freedom party. I don't want your depressing energy cluttering up the vibe." The divorce papers sat on the heavy oak table in the center of the room. The terms were brutal. 0 alimony. No claim to the marital assets. A complete and total severance. Brett's lawyer, a sweaty man named Mr. Henderson, stood by the table, tapping a pen against his clipboard. "It's a standard agreement given the prenuptial conditions," Henderson said, smirking. "If you contest it, Mrs. Caldwell, we will drag this out until you can't afford a loaf of bread. It's better to just sign." Keisha walked to the table. She looked at Brett. "Are you sure this is what you want, Brett? You're burning a bridge you might need to cross later." Brett laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Need you, Keisha, look at yourself. You're a community college dropout who spends her days gardening and volunteering. My family is royalty in this city. You are a charity case. I'm doing you a favor letting you leave without suing you for emotional distress." "Mom is right," Brett continued, stepping closer to intimidate her. "You don't fit in our world. You never did. You're too plain, too simple. I need a power couple image. I need a woman who brings assets to the table, not just casseroles." Keisha picked up the pen. The insult didn't sting the way he hoped it would. It just confirmed what she already knew: Brett was blind. He saw what he wanted to see. He didn't see the late-night phone calls she took in the guest room. He didn't see the multiple laptops she kept locked in her private study. He didn't know that gardening was her way of decompressing after managing a global supply chain crisis. "Fine," Keisha whispered. She signed her name with a flourish. "Keisha Reynolds." She dropped the pen. "Done," she said. "Get out," Patricia snapped. "Tiffany, throw her bags on the lawn. Let the neighbors see what happens when trash tries to mix with gold." Tiffany eagerly grabbed 2 black garbage bags filled with Keisha's clothes and hauled them out the front door, dumping them onto the pristine green grass. A few cars slowed down as they passed drivers craning their necks to see the drama at the Caldwell estate. Keisha walked out past them. She didn't stoop to pick up the bags immediately. She stopped on the porch and turned back to Brett. "You mentioned your company is bidding for the contract with Apex Global next month," Keisha said. It wasn't a question. Brett frowned. "How do you know about that?" "That's confidential board-level talk." "I listen," Keisha said. "Good luck with that meeting, Brett. I hear the CEO of Apex is a real shark. She doesn't tolerate mediocrity." "She," Brett scoffed. "Whatever. Get off my property before I call security." Keisha walked down the steps, picked up her bags, with her head held high, and loaded them into her dusty sedan. As she drove away, she didn't look back at the mansion. She looked at the dashboard clock. It was 2:00 p.m. She had a board meeting at 3:30 p.m. She needed to change out of her submissive housewife clothes and put on her power suit. The CEO of Apex Global couldn't be late. 6 months had passed since the divorce. For Brett, they had been 6 months of spiraling panic. The freedom he had celebrated with champagne and caviar had quickly turned into a nightmare. Caldwell Builds was bleeding money. The construction market had shifted toward sustainable, high-tech infrastructure, and Brett's old-school corner-cutting methods were obsolete. He was currently sitting in his plush office head in his hands. "We missed payroll again, Brett," said his CFO, a nervous man named Arthur. "I know, Arthur. Stop telling me things I know." Brett slammed his fist on the desk. "Where are we with the bank loan?" "Denied. They said our debt-to-income ratio is toxic. Our credit rating has been downgraded to junk status." Brett groaned. His mother, Patricia, was pacing the room, clutching her pearls as if they were life preservers. "This is impossible," Patricia hissed. "We are the Caldwells. We founded this city's infrastructure. How can the bank deny us? Because the bank cares about math." "Mom, not our last name," Brett snapped. He took a deep breath. "There's only one way out. The Apex Global merger." "The tech conglomerate?" Arthur asked, eyes widening. "Brett, they are way out of our league. They buy companies like us for spare parts. They are looking for a construction partner to build their new eco data centers across the Midwest," Brett said, pulling up a file on his tablet. "It's a $5 billion contract. If we get this, we're saved. If we don't, we sell the house." "Sell the house," Patricia shrieked. "I will die first." "You fix this, Brett. You go to that meeting and you charm them. You used to be charming before you married that heavyweight Keisha. Now that she's gone, you should be at the top of your game." "I have a meeting scheduled with their acquisition team tomorrow," Brett said, straightening his tie. "I'll make it happen. I'll promise them whatever they want, get the signature, and then figure out the details later." The next morning, Brett arrived at the headquarters of Apex Global. The building was a monolith of glass and steel that pierced the sky, making his own office building look like a shack. The lobby was silent white and intimidatingly clean. He approached the reception desk. "Brett Caldwell here to see the acquisition committee." The receptionist, a young man with sharp glasses, didn't smile. Mr. Caldwell, you're expected. Top floor. Boardroom A. Brett felt a surge of confidence. Top floor. That meant they were serious. He rode the elevator up, rehearsing his pitch. He would dazzle them with the Caldwell legacy. The elevator doors opened to a hallway lined with modern art that probably cost more than Brett's entire company. He walked into Boardroom A. It was empty save for 3 people sitting at the far end of a long black marble table. 2 of them were men in sharp suits looking at laptops, but the person in the center, the one in the high-backed leather chair, was turned away, looking out the floor-to-ceiling window at the city skyline. "Gentlemen," Brett said, putting on his best winning smile. "I'm Brett Caldwell. Thank you for seeing me." One of the men looked up. "Sit down, Mr. Caldwell. We've been reviewing your financials. They are concerning. Temporary setbacks." Brett waved his hand dismissively. "The market is volatile, but Caldwell Builds has a legacy of excellence. We are the perfect partner for your data centers." "Your safety record is spotty," the second man noted. "And you have 3 pending lawsuits from subcontractors who haven't been paid." Brett felt sweat trickling down his back. "Clerical errors, misunderstandings. Look, I'm here to talk to the decision-maker. I assume that's one of you." The chair at the head of the table slowly swiveled around. "Actually," a familiar, silky voice said, "the decision-maker is me." Brett froze. His brain simply refused to process the visual information. Sitting in the CEO's chair was a woman. She was wearing a tailored white suit that screamed power. Her hair, once kept in a modest bun, was now flowing in luxurious waves. She wore a diamond necklace that was tasteful, but undeniably massive. It was Keisha. But it wasn't the Keisha he knew. It wasn't the woman who wore stained aprons and apologized for taking up space. This woman radiated a terrifying, cold authority. "Keisha," Brett whispered, his voice cracking. What are you doing here? Did you get a job as a secretary?" The 2 men at the table gasped. One of them looked at Brett with horror. "Mr. Caldwell, you are addressing the founder and CEO of Apex Global, Ms. Reynolds." "CEO." Brett laughed nervously. No, you guys are confused. This is my ex-wife. She's unemployed. She gardens." Keisha didn't smile. She leaned forward, interlacing her fingers. "I did garden, Brett. It helped me think. When you manage a multinational logistics and tech firm with 4,000 employees, you need a hobby to stay grounded. But you never asked me about my day, did you? In 3 years, you never once asked me what I actually did." "This is a joke." Brett stood up, his face flushing red. "You're pranking me. You hired these actors. You're trying to get back at me for the divorce." Keisha tapped a button on the table. A massive screen behind her lit up. It displayed the corporate structure of Apex Global. At the very top, next to the title founder, CEO, was the name Keisha Reynolds. "I started Apex 10 years ago before I met you," Keisha explained calmly. "I built it from a garage startup into a Fortune 500 leader. When we met, I was already a billionaire. But I wanted a life where I was loved for me, not my bank account. So I kept it quiet. I used a trust to handle my expenses. I wanted to see if you were a man of character." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "You failed that test, Brett. Spectacularly." Brett collapsed back into his chair. The room spun. "A billionaire? But we struggled with the mortgage last year. You let me stress about money when you could have paid it off with pocket change. I wanted to build a partnership," Keisha said. "I would have helped you, Brett, if you had treated me with respect. if your mother hadn't treated me like a servant, if your sister hadn't mocked me. I was waiting for you to defend me. You never did. And when you threw me out, you sealed your fate." "Okay, look," Brett stammered, his survival instinct kicking in. "Keisha, baby. We made mistakes. I admit that. I was stressed. But we can fix this. We have a connection. If you're the CEO, you can approve this merger. Think of what we can do together. The Caldwell name and the Apex money." Keisha looked at him with pity. "The Caldwell name is toxic, Brett. And I didn't bring you here to approve the merger." She picked up a red folder from the table and slid it across the marble surface toward him. "I brought you here to discuss the acquisition of your debt." My what?" "Apex Global purchased your bank's distressed asset portfolio this morning," Keisha said coolly. "Specifically the loans attached to Caldwell Builds and your personal estate. I own your company's debt, Brett, and I own the mortgage on your mother's mansion." Brett stared at the red folder. He felt like he couldn't breathe. "And," Keisha added, a small, dangerous smile finally appearing on her lips, "I'm calling in the loans, in full, immediately." The drive back to the Caldwell estate was the longest of Brett's life. He vomited twice on the side of the road before he could even face the iron gates of the home he had grown up in. When he finally pulled into the driveway, the sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the lawn, where his sister had dumped Keisha's clothes just 6 months prior. He walked inside to find his mother, Patricia, and his sister Tiffany, drinking wine in the living room, oblivious to the guillotine blade hanging over their necks. "Did you get the deal?" Patricia asked, not even looking up from her magazine. "Did you charm them?" Brett stood in the doorway, his skin pale and clammy. "No." "What do you mean, no?" Tiffany scoffed. "You're useless, Brett. Dad would have closed that deal in 5 minutes." "I didn't close the deal," Brett whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and hysteria, "because the CEO of Apex Global is Keisha." The silence that followed was heavy, thick enough to choke on. Patricia froze her wine glass halfway to her mouth. Tiffany lowered her phone. "That's not funny," Patricia said, her voice dropping an octave. "Don't make jokes about that woman." "It's not a joke!" Brett screamed, the pressure finally exploding. He grabbed a vase from the side table and hurled it against the wall, shattering it. "She owns Apex. She's a billionaire, Mom. She bought our debt. She owns the company loans. She owns the credit lines, and she owns the mortgage on this house." Patricia stood up slowly, her face draining of color. That is impossible. She was a nobody. She wore thrift store clothes. She drove a Honda. It was a test," Brett cried, sinking onto the sofa and burying his face in his hands. "She was testing us to see if we loved her for her, and we treated her like garbage. And now, she's calling in the loans. Immediate repayment. $40 million, Mom. We have 48 hours. We sue her." Patricia shrieked, her shock turning into vicious anger. "She committed fraud. She lied to us by omission that money is marital property. Get Henderson on the phone. We will take half of that company." "We signed a prenup," Brett moaned. "You made me make her sign it. Remember to protect the family legacy from her poverty." Before Patricia could respond, the sound of heavy tires crunching on gravel drew their attention to the window. It wasn't a lawyer. It was a convoy. 3 black SUVs pulled up, flanked by 2 sheriff's department cruisers. "No," Brett whispered. She said immediately, I didn't think she meant today. The front door burst open. It wasn't the police who entered first, but a team of men in dark uniforms with the Apex Global logo embroidered on their chests. They were asset recovery specialists. Behind them walked Sheriff Miller, a different officer than they usually dealt with holding a clipboard. And walking calmly behind the sheriff, wearing a trench coat over her white suit, was Keisha. She stepped into the foyer of the house she had been kicked out of. She looked around at the vaulted ceilings and the expensive art with a look of mild boredom. "Get out!" Patricia screamed, rushing forward like a wild animal. "Get out of my house, you deceiver, you witch!" Two of the security guards stepped in front of Keisha, blocking Patricia effortlessly. "It's not your house, Mrs. Caldwell." Keisha said, her voice smooth and echoing in the large room. "Technically, the bank has owned it for years because you've been refinancing to pay for your lifestyle. And since I bought the bank's position, I own it. And you are trespassing." "You can't do this," Tiffany cried, shrinking back against the sofa. "We have rights. Squatters' rights. Tenant rights." "This is a commercial foreclosure on a corporate-backed asset," Keisha explained, pulling a document from her coat. "Your mother put the house up as collateral for the business loan last year. The business defaulted this morning at 9:00 a.m. when I accelerated the debt. The sheriff is here to enforce the eviction." She looked at the sheriff. "Officer, proceed." "You have 10 minutes to gather personal essentials," the sheriff announced, his voice booming. "Medications and documents only. No valuables. Everything else is now the property of the creditor to be liquidated against the debt." "My jewelry," Patricia gasped, clutching her neck. "If it was purchased with company funds or listed as insurance collateral, it stays," Keisha said. She walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up a crystal figurine, the same type of object Patricia had accused Keisha of being too clumsy to handle years ago. Keisha held it up to the light. "You used to yell at me if I dusted this wrong, Patricia. You said I didn't understand the value of quality." She opened her hand and let the crystal drop. It hit the marble hearth and shattered into 1,000 glittering shards. Patricia let out a strangled sob. "Oops," Keisha said, stepping over the glass. "I guess it wasn't that valuable after all, just like your opinion of me." "You are evil," Brett spat, standing up. "You planned this. You waited for us to be weak." "I waited for you to be you," Keisha corrected him. She moved closer to him, her eyes hard as flint. "Do you remember the day you kicked me out? Do you remember telling me, 'I was leaving with nothing, that I was dead weight. I'm just returning the favor, Brett. You're leaving with nothing. I'm stripping the company. I'm liquidating the assets. I'm dissolving Caldwell Builds.'" "10 minutes is up," the sheriff barked. "Wait my clothes," Tiffany wailed. "Here," Keisha said. She snapped her fingers. One of the security guards walked in carrying 2 black garbage bags. He tossed them onto the Persian rug at Tiffany's feet. "I had your rooms packed up while you were arguing," Keisha said. "Garbage bags, just like you gave me. I thought it was a family tradition." The humiliation was total. Patricia was weeping openly now, stripped of her dignity. Brett was shaking with impotent rage. Tiffany looked at the garbage bags with horror. "Escort them off the property," Keisha ordered. The guards grabbed them by the arms. As they were dragged out the front door, the neighbors were watching again. But this time, they weren't watching a poor housewife be discarded. They were watching the fall of the Caldwell dynasty. Keisha stood in the doorway, watching them being shoved toward Brett's luxury car, which was currently being hooked up to a tow truck. "Oh, the car too," Keisha called out. "Company lease. You'll have to walk to the motel." "It's only 3 miles. Good cardio." As the tow truck drove away with their last symbol of status, leaving the Caldwells standing on the sidewalk with their garbage bags, Keisha closed the heavy oak door. She turned to the empty house. "Gut it," she said to her team. "Sell everything. I want this place bare by morning." 3 weeks later. The Motel 6 on the outskirts of the city was a far cry from the Caldwell mansion. The air smelled of stale cigarettes and regret. Patricia sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper. "We have to fight," she muttered for the 100th time. "We can't end like this. I am a Caldwell." "We have a lawyer," Brett said, pacing the small room. He looked ragged. He hadn't shaved in days, and his expensive suit was wrinkled and stained. "Mr. Greaves, he says we have a case." "Greaves is an ambulance chaser," Tiffany complained from the bathroom doorway, where she was trying to apply makeup in the dim light. "He smells like boiled cabbage." "He's the only one who would take the case on a contingency basis," Brett snapped. "Everyone else wants a retainer we don't have. Greaves thinks we can hit her for matrimonial fraud. He says since she didn't disclose the billions during the marriage, the prenup is void." "Exactly," Patricia said, her eyes lighting up with a dangerous hope. "She lied. Judges hate liars. We'll get it all back, Brett, and then we will crush her." The courtroom was packed. The fall of the Caldwells and the revelation of the secret billionaire wife had become the biggest story in the state. Reporters lined the back of the room, pens poised. Keisha sat at the defendant's table. She looked radiant, wearing a navy blue power suit that cost more than the motel the Caldwells were living in. Beside her sat her lawyer, a woman named Fiona Sterling, known in legal circles as the Viper. On the plaintiff's side, Brett, Patricia, and Tiffany sat with Mr. Greaves. Greaves was a sweaty, disheveled man who kept shuffling his papers nervously. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Whitmore entered. He was an older man with a reputation for zero tolerance for nonsense. He sat down and adjusted his glasses. "We are here for the matter of Caldwell v. Reynolds," Judge Whitmore said. "The plaintiffs are seeking to void the pre-nuptial agreement and claim 50% of the defendant's assets, alleging fraud and non-disclosure." Mr. Greaves stood up. "Your Honor. This case is simple. The defendant, Miss Reynolds, spent 3 years deceiving my client. She pretended to be destitute. She hid billions of dollars in offshore trusts and shell companies. Marriage is a contract based on trust and full disclosure. By hiding her wealth, she denied my client the ability to make an informed decision. Therefore, the pre-nuptial agreement he signed under the impression she was poor should be voided." Brett nodded vigorously. It sounded good. It sounded right. Judge Whitmore looked at Keisha's table. "Ms. Sterling," Fiona Sterling stood up. She didn't have any papers. She didn't need them. "Your Honor," Fiona said, her voice cool and crisp. "The plaintiff's argument hinges on the idea that he was tricked into signing a prenuptial agreement. However, I would like to direct the court's attention to Exhibit A." She motioned to the screen on the wall. The prenuptial agreement appeared. "Who drafted this agreement, Mr. Caldwell?" Fiona asked, looking directly at Brett. Brett swallowed. My family lawyer." "Mr. Henderson." "Correct," Fiona said. "It was drafted by your team. And do you recall the specific language regarding separate property in Article 4, Section 2? Fiona read from the screen, highlighting the text in red. "Each party waives any and all right to inquire into the financial nature of the other party's separate holdings. Both parties agree that any assets held prior to the marriage, whether disclosed or undisclosed, known or unknown, shall remain the sole property of the original owner. This clause is absolute and irrevocable." The courtroom went silent. "You see, Your Honor," Fiona continued pacing in front of the judge's bench. The Caldwell family was so terrified that Keisha, who they thought was a gold digger, would try to find their hidden money, that they wrote the most restrictive draconian non-disclosure clause I have ever seen in my career. They explicitly waived their right to know about her assets, because they wanted to ensure she had no right to know about theirs. Keisha leaned forward, her microphone picking up her calm voice. I tried to tell you, Brett. The night before the wedding, I tried to hand you a financial portfolio. Do you remember what you said? Brett went pale. He remembered. Flashback. The night before the wedding. Keisha holding a thick envelope. Brett. There's something you need to know about my finances before we sign this. Brett, laughing, pushing the envelope away. Keisha, honey. I don't care about your student loans or your little savings account. Just sign the paper so my mom gets off my back. What's mine is mine. What's yours is yours. Deal. Brett stammered in the courtroom. You said, I don't care about your little savings, Keisha quoted. You insisted on the separation of assets. You built the wall, Brett. I'm just standing on the other side of it. Judge Whitmore looked at the document, then at Mr. Greaves. Mr. Greaves, did your client draft this document? Yes, Your Honor, but nothing. Judge Whitmore snapped. You cannot write a contract to protect yourself from a gold digger and then cry foul when it turns out the person you married was the one with the gold. The contract stands. The motion to void is denied. But, Your Honor, Patricia stood up, unable to help herself. It's not fair. She humiliated us. She has billions. She can afford to give us a settlement. Sit down, Mrs. Caldwell, the judge warned. She's a predator, Patricia screamed. She came into our lives to destroy us. Order. The judge banged his gavel. Fiona Sterling cleared her throat. Actually, Your Honor, since Mrs. Caldwell brought up the issue of destruction, we have a cross motion. Fiona signaled to the screen again. During the discovery phase of this lawsuit, my client's forensic accountants did a deep dive into Caldwell Builds' finances to prepare our defense. We found something interesting. Brett felt a cold pit open in his stomach. What? We found that for the last 5 years, Fiona said, her voice turning razor sharp. Patricia and Brett Caldwell have been systematically overcharging city contracts for materials they never purchased. They have been invoicing for Grade A steel and using Grade C scrap. That is not just bad business, Your Honor. That is embezzlement and grand larceny. The courtroom erupted. Reporters jumped to their feet. That's a lie, Brett shouted. We have the invoices, Keisha said calmly, holding up a stack of papers. And since I now own the company, I have full access to the servers. I found the double books, Brett, the ones you kept on the encrypted drive. She looked him dead in the eye. You called me a charity case, Keisha said. But it turns out you were the one stealing from the public to buy your fancy suits. Judge Whitmore looked at the evidence. His face grew dark. He turned to the bailiff. Bailiff, lock the doors. I am holding the plaintiffs in contempt, and I am referring this evidence immediately to the district attorney's office. Sheriff, take Mr. Caldwell and Mrs. Caldwell into custody pending charges. What? Patricia shrieked as the sheriff moved toward her. Arrested me. I am a Caldwell. You have the right to remain silent, the sheriff said, cuffing her hands behind her back. Brett tried to run. He actually scrambled over the table, aiming for the side exit, but he was tackled by 2 bailiffs before he made it 3 steps. As he was pinned to the floor, face pressed against the dirty carpet, he looked up and saw Keisha standing over him. She wasn't smiling. She looked sad. Why? Brett wheezed. Why did you do this? I didn't do this, Brett, Keisha said softly. You did. I just turned on the lights. She turned and walked out of the courtroom, the camera flashes blinding, leaving her ex-husband and mother-in-law to be dragged away in chains. But the story wasn't over. Keisha had destroyed their past, but she hadn't yet secured her future. And there was one loose end, Tiffany. The sister had slipped out of the courtroom during the chaos, and she wasn't going to go down without a fight. She had one card left to play a secret that Keisha thought she had buried years ago. Tiffany Caldwell had always been good at one thing, lying. While her brother and mother were being processed at the county jail, trading their silk pajamas for orange jumpsuits, Tiffany was sitting in the corner of a 24-hour internet cafe in a run-down part of the city. She pulled her hood low over her face. She had maxed out her last credit card to buy a prepaid burner phone and a cup of lukewarm coffee. She wasn't sad. She wasn't remorseful. She was furious. She thinks she's won, Tiffany muttered, typing furiously on the sticky keyboard. She thinks she can just stomp on us and walk away. Tiffany knew she couldn't beat Keisha in a courtroom. She couldn't beat her in a bank. But she knew that Apex Global was a publicly traded company, and public companies were terrified of one thing, scandal. She opened an encrypted messaging app and contacted a man named Bauer. Bauer was a disgraced tabloid journalist who had lost his credentials for hacking celebrities' phones. He was slimy, unethical, and exactly who Tiffany needed. Tiffany. I have the story of the decade. The Virgin CEO isn't a genius. She's a thief. I have proof. Bauer, I'm listening. But my price is high. Tiffany. You get the exclusive rights. The ad revenue alone will set you up for life. Just help me burn her. For the next 12 hours, they crafted a masterpiece of fiction. Tiffany knew enough about the timeline of Apex Global to weave a convincing lie. She claimed that the core algorithm Keisha used to build her empire, the logistics AI, wasn't written by Keisha. She claimed it was stolen from Brett's late father, the founder of Caldwell Builds, on his deathbed. Tiffany recorded a video in the cafe's bathroom. She made herself look disheveled and terrified. She cried on cue. My name is Tiffany Caldwell, she sobbed into the camera lens, and my family has been silenced. Keisha Reynolds didn't just divorce my brother. She destroyed us to cover up her crime. She stole the code that made her a billionaire from my dying father's safe. She is a fraud, and now that we tried to ask for our fair share, she threw my mother in prison. She uploaded the video to every major social media platform. She sent the dossier to the SEC. She sent it to the board of directors at Apex. Then she sat back and waited. The reaction was nuclear. The internet loves a villain, but it loves a fallen hero even more. Within 4 hours, the hashtag Keisha the Thief was trending #1 globally. The video had 20 million views. The stock market reacted instantly. Apex Global shares plummeted 18% in pre-market trading. Billions of dollars in market cap evaporated in minutes. Keisha was in her penthouse apartment sipping green tea when her phone exploded with notifications. Liam, her chief operating officer, COO, burst into her living room without knocking. Liam was a man of few words, a tall, broad-shouldered former military strategist who had been Keisha's right hand for 5 years. He was the only person who knew where she lived. Don't look at the news, Liam said, his voice grim. I already saw it. Keisha said, her hand trembling slightly as she set the tea down. She's good. I'll give her that. It's a complete lie, but it's emotional. People believe tears more than they believe spreadsheets. The board is panicking, Liam reported, pacing the floor. Preston wants an emergency vote. He's calling for your suspension pending an investigation. He says the optic of a CEO who stole from a dead man is toxic. Keisha stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the city she had helped build. I built this company from a laptop in a garage. I wrote every line of that code myself. And now, the girl who never worked a day in her life is going to tear it down with a lie. We can fight it, Liam said, stepping closer to her. But it will get ugly. We need to prove the negative. We need to prove you didn't steal it. No. Keisha turned around, her eyes flashing with a cold fire. We don't need to defend. We need to attack. Tiffany wants a war fine. But she forgot one thing. What's that? She's using a burner phone, Keisha said. But she's logging into my old Netflix account. She never logged out on her tablet. I can see her IP address. Keisha picked up her phone. Get the jet ready, Liam. We have a board meeting to crash, and tell the cybersecurity team I want the location of that internet cafe. The boardroom of Apex Global was a shark tank. 12 directors sat around the table, their faces grim. At the head of the table sat Preston, a silver-haired man who had always envied Keisha's rapid rise. He was smiling internally. This was his chance to seize the crown. The stock is in free fall, Preston announced, gesturing to the red graphs on the wall. We have lost $7 billion in value in 6 hours. The public trusts the Caldwell girl. Her video is compelling. Keisha isn't here to defend herself, one of the directors, a woman named Beverly, argued. We cannot vote to remove the founder without her presence. She is hiding. Preston slammed his hand on the table. She is hiding because she is guilty. We need to sever ties immediately to save the company. I move for a vote of no confidence to remove Keisha Reynolds as CEO effective immediately. Seconded, another director said. All in favor? Preston asked, raising his hand. 5 hands went up, then 6. Before the 7th hand could rise, sealing Keisha's fate, the double doors of the boardroom were kicked open. Keisha strode in. She wasn't wearing a suit this time. She was wearing a simple black t-shirt and jeans, the developer uniform she used to wear when she started the company. She looked fierce, energized, and dangerous. Liam walked a step behind her, carrying a laptop. Am I late for my own execution? Keisha asked, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. You have no business here, Preston sneered. We are discussing your termination. You are discussing a lie, Keisha said. She walked to the head of the table. Preston didn't move. She looked down at him. Get out of my chair, Preston. You are a liability, Preston shouted. The world thinks you're a thief. Liam, the screen, Keisha ordered. Liam connected the laptop to the main display. The red stock graphs vanished, replaced by a live video feed. It was grainy, black and white footage. It showed a woman in a hoodie sitting in a cramped internet cafe. She was talking on a phone. The audio crackled through the boardroom speakers. I don't care if it's true, Bauer. Just make it stick. I need to hurt her. She put my family in jail. I want her to lose everything. Just write the story that she stole the code. Nobody can prove where code comes from anyway. We just need to tank the stock so the board fires her. The voice was unmistakably Tiffany's. The boardroom went dead silent. Preston's face turned the color of ash. This footage was taken 20 minutes ago, Keisha said. My security team tapped the CCTV feed of the cafe where she is hiding, and that audio, that's from the burner phone she's using. We traced the signal. Keisha leaned on the table looking at the directors. She admitted it's a lie. She admitted it's a vendetta. And she admitted she is manipulating you to fire me. She turned her gaze slowly to Preston. You were ready to burn this company to the ground because of a tabloid rumor, Preston. You didn't ask for proof. You didn't support your CEO. You just wanted my job. Preston stammered, I was acting in the interest of the shareholders. You are fired, Keisha said calmly. You can't fire me. I'm a board member. Actually, Beverly spoke up, looking at Preston with disgust. The bylaws state that any member who acts with gross negligence or malice against the company can be removed by a majority vote. I move to remove Preston. Seconded. The entire room shouted in unison. Keisha didn't wait for Preston to pack his things. Security, remove him. As Preston was dragged out, shouting threats, Keisha turned back to the screen, where Tiffany was still visible, unaware she was being watched by the most powerful people in the tech world. Now, Keisha said, her voice softening, but losing none of its edge. Let's deal with the leak. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. On the big screen, they saw Tiffany's phone light up. Tiffany answered. Hello, Bauer, Tiffany whispered. No, Tiffany, Keisha said into the boardroom microphone. It's Keisha. On the screen, Tiffany jumped, dropping the coffee cup. She looked around the empty cafe in panic. How did you get this number? I own a tech company. Tiffany, Keisha said, did you really think a prepaid phone would hide you from me? You stole from my father, Tiffany screamed into the phone. Your father couldn't program a VCR, let alone an AI logistics network, Keisha said. I am broadcasting this conversation to my board of directors, and in about 5 minutes I will be broadcasting this video feed to the police. You just committed securities fraud, libel, and market manipulation. Those are federal crimes, Tiffany. You're going to join your mother and brother. No, Tiffany cried, grabbing her bag. I'm leaving. You can't find me. Look out the window, Tiffany, Keisha said. On the video feed, blue and red lights washed over the cafe window. The police had arrived. Tiffany froze. She slumped back into the chair, defeated. The phone slipped from her hand. Keisha hung up. She signaled Liam to cut the feed. The room was quiet. The stock ticker on the side of the screen updated. Apex Global plus 22%. The truth was out. The stock was rebounding harder than before. The Virgin CEO wasn't just innocent. She was invincible. Keisha took a deep breath. She felt the adrenaline crashing. She was exhausted. Meeting adjourned, she whispered. As the directors filed out, shaking her hand and apologizing, Keisha stayed in her chair. Liam remained by her side. You did it, Liam said softly. They're all gone. Brett, Patricia, Tiffany. The slate is clean. Keisha looked up at him. For the first time in years, the guard she kept up the wall she had built to protect herself from people like Brett crumbled. I won, she said, tears finally spilling over. But why does it feel so empty? Liam, I have the money. I have the company. I have the revenge. But I go home to an empty penthouse. Liam hesitated, then did something he had never done before. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm, firm, and real. It's empty because you've been fighting a war for 3 years, Liam said. The war is over, Keisha. Now you actually have to live. And maybe you don't have to do it alone. Keisha looked at Liam. She really looked at him. She saw the loyalty in his eyes. The way he had stood by her when the world turned against her. The way he looked at her not as a billionaire, but as a woman who deserved to be safe. "I don't trust easily anymore, Liam," she admitted. "I know." Liam smiled a genuine, gentle smile. "I'm a patient man. I'm not going anywhere." Keisha squeezed his hand back. But there was one final thing she had to do. One final door to close before she could truly move on with Liam or with her life. She had to visit him. She had to visit Brett one last time. The visiting room at the county detention center was cold, smelling of bleach and despair. Keisha sat on one side of the thick plexiglass barrier. She wasn't wearing her power suit today, nor was she wearing the humble clothes she used to wear for Brett. She wore a bright yellow sundress, a color she had always loved, but Brett had forbidden because he said it was too loud. On the other side of the glass, Brett shuffled in. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame. In just 3 weeks, he had aged 10 years. His sandy hair was shaved close to his scalp, and the arrogance that had defined his face for a lifetime was completely eroded. He sat down, picking up the black phone receiver with shaking hands. Keisha picked up hers. "You came," Brett said, his voice raspy. "I needed to close the book, Brett," Keisha said softly. "I couldn't leave the final chapter unwritten." "My mother. She's not doing well," Brett said, his eyes darting around nervously. "She can't handle the food. She can't handle the noise. Tiffany is blaming everyone but herself." "They made their choices," Keisha said, her voice devoid of pity, but also devoid of malice. "And so did you." Brett looked at her, tears pooling in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Keisha. I know it doesn't mean anything now. But I am. I was stupid. I was blind. I had a billionaire wife, and I treated her like a maid. If I had just been decent." "That's the tragedy, isn't it?" Keisha interrupted. "You think the tragedy is that you lost the money. You think if you had known I was rich, you would have treated me better, and that is exactly why you don't deserve me." She leaned in closer to the glass. "You should have treated me with respect when you thought I was poor, Brett. Character isn't how you treat a CEO. It's how you treat the person who cleans the floor. You failed the only test that matters." Brett lowered his head, sobbing quietly. "What happens now? What happens to the house, the company?" "Caldwell Builds is dissolved," Keisha answered. "I liquidated the assets to pay off your creditors and the subcontractors you stiffed. I made sure every worker you ripped off got their paycheck." "And the house?" Brett asked. "My grandfather built that house." "I donated it," Keisha said. "I signed the deed over to the city this morning. It's going to be a transitional housing shelter for women escaping domestic abuse and financial control. Women who were told they were dead weight by men like you. Now that house will be the place where they get their wings back." Brett flinched, as if he had been slapped. The irony was perfect, stinging, and absolute. "I have to go now, Brett," Keisha said, hanging up the phone. "Keisha, wait!" Brett screamed, slamming his hand against the glass. "Don't leave me here. I have nothing. I have nobody." Keisha didn't turn back. She walked out of the heavy metal doors, leaving the sound of his regret trapped behind the glass. Outside, the sun was shining. The air tasted sweet. Liam was waiting for her by the car. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was just waiting, watching for her. When he saw her, he didn't ask how it went. He just opened the door. "Where to, Ms. Reynolds?" Liam asked, a playful glint in his eye. Keisha paused, looking up at the sky. For 3 years, she had been Brett's wife. For 10 years, she had been a CEO. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she was just Keisha. "Let's go get a burger." She smiled, sliding into the car. A greasy one. And then, let's drive to the coast. I hear the ocean looks different when you're truly free. Liam got in the driver's seat. The coast sounds perfect. As the car pulled away, leaving the prison and the past in the rearview mirror. Keisha Reynolds didn't check her stock price. She didn't check her bank account. She reached over and rested her hand on Liam's arm. She had lost a husband who loved money, but she had found a life that was finally worth living. And that was a fortune no currency could buy. And that is the story of how Keisha turned her pain into power. Brett and his family thought they were discarding trash, but they were actually throwing away a diamond. It's a harsh lesson, but a necessary one. Never underestimate someone. Just because they are humble, and never judge a person's worth by their bank account. The Caldwells learned the hard way that when you dig a grave for someone else, you better dig one for yourself, too. What did you think of Keisha's revenge? Did she go too far by taking the family home, or was it exactly what they deserved? And what would you have done if you were in her shoes? Would you have told them about the money sooner? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and remember, be kind because you never know who you're really talking to. See you in the next video.